Amy and I had begged our parents for years to let us have summer vacation all by ourselves, but they had given us the same answer over and over again. We weren't old enough. However, this changed on Amy's 16th birthday, when our parents gave her enough allowance to have her own trip. And, of course, as the close sisters we were, she took me with her. But there was a catch. We had to not only be accompanied by our cousin Fred, who is 19 years old, but we also had to take his little brother with him, Norman. He was barely 7 and already a handful to deal with. But, like Amy said, we just gotta take what we get. We decided to go on an inn at a lake. Amy really wanted to go to California, but with Norman around, it'd be difficult to keep track of him, so the closer we stayed together, the better. As disappointed as we were about the non-Californian experience, we made the best out of it. We'd go to the lake every single day and wander around the forest later for hours. Sometimes we'd pretend to be in a movie together as two spies hiding from a hitman behind the trees. Amy had always been good at making the most unfortunate circumstances fun. We had a blast. Fred was the real victim of that trip. He had plans to go to Florida with his girlfriend, but had to cancel it because of us. We invited him to the forest outings a bunch of times, but he wasn't interested. We were never really that close to him, so we kind of understood his lack of enthusiasm, so we left him be. We also tried to keep Norman with us at all times, but he preferred to stay with his brother instead. I wasn't sure if he just thought he couldn't have fun with us because we were girls, or if he just felt safer with Fred. Either way, the only time we were all together was at mealtime. Amy and I were in different bedrooms than Fred and Norman. With that kind of daily schedule, Amy and I kept an eye on Norman in the morning at the lake, while Fred kept him company in the afternoon. We barely saw the owner of the inn. He was an old man wearing a red hat and a fishing vest, even though there was no boat to go fishing with. He was weird. The only time we talked to him was when we first arrived 2 weeks ago, when he gave us a tour and the keys to the rooms. He also warned us to never go east into the forest, for there was an old cave that was supposedly cursed. None of us believed that, obviously, but just in case, we stayed away from that area. We didn't talk much to his wife, but she greeted us for every mealtime and was the one who prepared food for us. It was quite a strange inn with all the set meal times, but the meals were fantastic, so we never complained. Amy jumped once again into the lake, letting her curly blonde hair wave around and disappear into the water. The drops of water landing on me gave me a shiver, but not as badly as the first time she did that. The water seemed colder, so I hesitated a bit until tiny hands pushed me from behind and I sank deep into the lake. Shivering, I dove up to face the perpetrator. Norman wore a wide grin on his face.
And? Is the water cold?
He laughed, still standing on the grass, not coming near the water. Oh, I don't know. You tell me, I said as I saw Amy sneak up from behind him and pushed him into the lake. The lake wasn't that deep, so we weren't worried about him drowning. We did the same thing yesterday, so whatever. As his head popped out at the surface, Amy and I started laughing. He had a thick stick on his hand and tried to poke Amy with it, but Amy was too high up for him to reach. Suddenly, he started crying. I approached him to give comfort, but he was already running towards the inn.
I'm telling Mom!
He yelled, disappearing into the inn. Amy and I looked at each other worried. Do you think we went too far? I asked, not really sure of what just happened. Amy didn't seem too worried.
Oh, please, Bella, we practically did the same thing yesterday and he was laughing as well. I think he's just having a bad day. Now, for our Waterland movie.
She jumped back into the lake and we just went on with our usual shenanigans. After the lake, we went back in and changed clothes to attend lunch. However, neither Fred nor Norman were there. When we asked the wife if she'd seen them, she apologized for not knowing the answer. Amy went upstairs to the rooms and came back saying that no one was there.
Who knows? Maybe Fred actually decided to enjoy the forest now,
Amy said with her usual confident voice. I just trusted her and we ate our meal in silence. Without much else happening, we visited the forest again, but didn't see Fred or Norman. After a few hours of just hiking, we went back to the inn. As we entered and went upstairs between 2 aisles, I asked Amy, maybe we should check on them again. Not hearing Norman scream for his DS is creepy.
You're right. This little brat should give some noise at this hour,
Amy replied. So we went to the other aisle when suddenly we heard footsteps from the other aisle, where our room was. There you are! Where the hell were you two? Fred shouted as he arrived in front of us. His face was full with anger, the kind I hadn't seen before. Before I could say anything, though, Amy took the lead.
We went out and hiked a bit as always. Why were you at our door anyway? Where's Norman?
Fred looked even angrier than before and froze a fit. Where's Norman? So now you're looking for him? After your trip to the lake, I expected Norman to show up, but he didn't. So I looked around the inn and even went out to the forest and he was nowhere around. Even Amy had a worried expression on her then. So Norman had been missing ever since the little incident at the lake. So for about 8 hours. This isn't good, I thought.
Wait, if you were at the forest, how come we didn't see you?
Amy suddenly asked. Because I thought you'd see him in your hike, so I checked the east of the forest, Fred answered.
East? We aren't supposed to go there, remember?
I exclaimed as I heard him say where he went. Both Amy and Fred looked at me with a confused glance. You want to tell me a 7-year-old cares about that? Fred said with an aggressive tone. He was right. It was a dumb question. Still. Maybe he got curious and went there, Fred explained. We looked at each other, trying to find a solution to this. Without a word, we decided on what had to be done. We gave the wife the excuse that Norman caught a cold and didn't feel like coming down to the dinner table. So she packed a separate box with rice and meatballs that we later packed into the rucksack Fred was carrying. In the rucksack we also took a first aid kit with us that Fred's parents packed into his luggage in case of an emergency. With a little kid, you never know what they'll do in the dark. I carried around a blanket in case Norman was cold, while Amy carried around 3 tiny flashlights. We didn't want to split up already, so we thought her keeping them for a while would do no harm. They're also quick to lose battery, so we didn't want to waste them just yet. After both the wife and the old man went to sleep, we snuck outside and headed to the east of the forest. All of us hoped to find Norman before finding the cave, but it was inevitable, as it took us only 10 minutes to find it. Weirdly enough, Fred didn't see it when he went out by himself that afternoon, walking on the same trail, so he was shocked how quickly we found it. We didn't pay much attention to that and inspected the entrance of the cave first. Nothing special stuck out. It was a normal, humid stone cave with little puddles of water on the ground. The further you looked in, the darker the cave seemed, until you could only see a black hole at the end of it. No sound, no animals, not even bugs are seen at the entrance. Amy moved the flashlight around and let the ray of light fill the cave. Nothing. Amy took a step forward, almost hitting the puddle with her sneakers. Without thinking, I blurted out,
Wait! Maybe he isn't in there. He might still be around the cave instead. We should look around more.
She turned to me and said,
If you want to do that, do it. But I'm gonna go in.
Me too, Fred added, as they both stepped into the cave. Shaking and shivering, I hesitated until I almost couldn't see them anymore. I ran after them.
Hey, wait for me!
For the first half an hour, everything went more or less well. No changed directions and nothing suspicious was found. I didn't know why, but I felt like something bad was about to happen, and it not happening creeped me out. The deeper we went in, the colder it got, to a point where I put on the blanket on myself that was intended for Norman. My long coat was barely covering my legs and my boots were not very thick either, not to mention that my leggings weren't doing much. I wondered how Amy with her short skirt thought that just a hoodie would be enough, but she wasn't complaining. The only person who was well covered up was Fred, with a thick dark jacket and jeans. He almost seemed like he should be sweating instead. As I walked behind the both of them, I kept looking around the cave. Something's wrong, I thought. How was a cave in the middle of a forest not covered in spider webs or any kinds of bugs at all? As I wondered about it, I accidentally walked into Fred and made him slightly stumble. I was about to apologize when I realized why they both stopped there. Not only was the pathway split in two now, but there was a stick on the ground. Amy picked it up and inspected it with a flashlight. Even though I didn't look at the stick closely this morning, I knew it was the one Norman took with him while crying. It was a weird stick, more shaped like a cone than anything. There were cornings on it that spiraled around it from top to bottom. It kind of looked like the horn of a unicorn. We all stared at the split pathway. "What now?" I asked. Amy handed both me and Fred the small flashlights. Of course, I thought. We gotta split up. A part of me wanted to remind them of the horror movie trope, but I decided that it wasn't appropriate. I was going to step next to Amy when she suddenly said,
Bella, you go with Fred on the left. I'll go into the right. We'll meet here again in about 30 minutes and decide what to do from there.
That was odd, I wondered in my head. Amy and I would always stick together. Whenever we got in trouble in school, we'd both get in trouble. If one was lost, the other one would find the other. We're inseparable. So why would you go alone? Fred's older than the both of us. He'd be fine on his own. Not to mention that if Fred and I grouped up, that meant if Amy found Norman, she wouldn't have a first aid kit nor a blanket with her to give to him. Before I could say anything, she was already gone and I was left alone with Fred. He too seemed like saying something but scoffed instead and started walking to the left. A part of me wanted to run after Amy, but despite that thought, my legs guided me to Fred. We didn't say much to each other for 10 minutes. Then, I felt like I should say it. I'm sorry about this, I weakly said. I looked up to him and tried to see how he reacted. He didn't look down to me. His tense demeanor changed into a relaxed one. It's alright. You both were just having fun. If I went to the lake myself, I might have seen Norman. No use crying over spilled milk. Let's just focus on finding him. I nodded and walked along when we suddenly heard a voice. It sounded like the one of a very old man. His voice cracked and sounded weak. Is that the owner? I thought. After a few seconds, we heard the voice again, and at that time, we could understand his message. Go! His voice echoed across the cave, to which I instinctively grabbed Fred's arm in fear. The moment the echoes died down, I let go of his arm and we started running towards the voice's origin. Our steps were echoed and we stepped on more puddles of water, making the splash make our shoes wet. When we arrived, we waved around our flashlight, and when the ray of light finally caught something, I screamed from the top of my lungs. My scream was repeated and elongated by the stone walls that would hang in the air for another few seconds. A skeleton. A skeleton in fisherman's clothing and a red hat was sitting at the dead end of the pathway. Bits of flesh were still stuck on the bones and the eye sockets had dried blood on them. Despite the horrific look of it, this couldn't have been the owner, I thought. We might have not seen him that often, but he was present at the dinner table the other day. This looked like it had been there for weeks or so. As I stood there in total shock, I heard Fred whisper, "Holy shit." He approached it slowly.
This isn't real, right?
I asked, frightened. Maybe it was a prank by the owner. Who knows? I thought, trying to see the plastic and the bones. Fred knelt down to it. He smelled it for a second and immediately covered his nose with his free hand. Blah! It's real, alright. Shit. As much as I felt like crying or throwing up, I held back everything I could as I saw Fred touching the skeleton's closed hand. Ew! Don't touch that! I shouted at him from the back. But curiosity got the best of me, so I slowly approached him, seeing what he was doing. Then I saw it. The bony hand held a piece of paper in it that Fred tried to pry open. After a few more seconds of struggling, the hand opened and Fred unfolded the paper. From the angle I couldn't see what was written in it. What I could hear, though, was Fred gasping for air. For the first time, I saw Fred, who was shaking. Before I could ask what was written on it, he got up and handed me the paper himself. It was my turn to inspect the paper. "Run while you can, Bella," I repeated the message. When I looked up to Fred, he seemed confused. "Bella? But it said my name before. Give me that." We both looked at the paper and like magic, it changed again. "Run while you can, Fred and Bella." "What the..." I started to say when suddenly a painful scream filled the air. We both turned around at the horrifying realization whose voice that scream belonged to. For once, nothing in me felt like hesitating, and both me and Fred started running back from where we came from. While we ran, the flashlights flickered, and for a good few seconds, the cave was filled with complete darkness. Right at that moment, my left foot got stuck on something, and I stumbled, crashing my body to the cold ground. In panic, I shouted, "Fred! Fred!" "I'm here! Hold on!" Fred replied within the darkness. I heard a metal sound banging against the stone walls, with bits of lights flashing every time the flashlight got hit onto the wall. As I carefully got up and looked down to see what made me stumble, a fearful sight was seen whenever the room was lit again. After the final bang, Fred's flashlight gained complete control again and the room was fully visible. But there was nothing to celebrate. On the ground, Amy's face was covered in either her own dyed blonde hair strands or the blood that came flowing from her mouth. Her usual rosy cheeks were pale as snow, and her expression seemed lifeless. But the most horrifying sight was her torso. A huge hole was in her hoodie. Torn seams were visible. Not only that, but the hole went as deep as to her skin and flesh. Without realizing it at first, my hands were shaking her body, trying to understand what was happening. She's not... Oh God, she's not, I thought as I started shaking her harder and harder in frustration. My throat made squealing noises, trying to say something, but the more I looked at the lifeless body that was Amy, the harder it became to even breathe. My mind was like a hurricane in a chaos, and not ready to stop all too soon. Run, I thought. I have to run. I have to. And like I was back at the lake hit with the sudden cold water, I was pulled back to reality when a palm struck my face. The pulsating pain caused my hands to cover it up, trying to realize what just happened. I looked up and had Fred in front of me. Bah! Snap out of it! Running won't help! That was when I suddenly noticed that I wasn't on the ground anymore. I was standing. Standing and a few feet apart from Amy's corpse. Wait, was I about to run? I thought. Why was that my first instinct? My eyes started welling up and I heard a sigh from Fred before hugging me, patting my back while I was crying. While keeping him tight, I could hear him sniffing. He was crying too, but tried to hold back for my sake. As he let go, we looked at each other and then back to Amy. A part of me imagined her getting up again, laughing, and taking the lead again. But no, she just laid there. Then Fred said it. There's no way we'll find Norman. It made us both feel terrible, but we decided that we had to go, leaving his little brother behind. I knew it was harder on him than it was on me, but he's still my cousin. But whatever killed Amy, there's no telling how we'd fare against that. Not to mention, at that point, we only had one functional flashlight. Hand in hand, we walked the path back we believed was where we came from. It was only one way back, and yet we were walking for what felt like hours into the same direction with no exit. I never noticed it, but Fred would tell me to stop gearing towards the opposite direction. My body just did things without a good reason. Was it fear? Maybe. I tried my best to keep my legs at bay, but as our luck would have it, his flashlight started to flicker again. He cursed himself. Stupid thing! Just work already! And when the lights went out, we suddenly lost consciousness.
Freddy! Billy! Come on! Wake up already!
A high-pitched noise was the first thing that woke me up. As I opened my eyes, all I saw was the color blue, then green, until I could decipher the trees. A hint of reddish purple was visible within the sky. It was dawn. I slowly sat up straight, getting rid of a single leaf on my cheek with a quick movement of my hand. Looking around, I recognized the forest. Even the trail we followed was visible, but no matter how many times I looked around and turned, the cave was gone. There was nothing. Looking down on my right, Fred was laying there, heads first towards the ground, a small bug trying to climb on his face but fell off. The rucksack was damaged, random tears across it with dirt on it. Turning on my left, there he was. Norman. His red eyes indicated that he had been crying. Before I could register what I was looking at, Norman hugged me, crying on my coat as he wept.
I'm sorry. I won't do it again. I promise.
Do what again? I thought. Slowly, memories came back and Amy's lifeless face flashed through my mind again. I wanted to cry, but I felt like I had to keep it in until I was back in the room, not in front of him. I grabbed Norman's tiny shoulders and distanced him away from me, greeting him with a smile. You're safe. That's all that matters. Not sure if that was what he wanted me to say, but he got infected by my smile and started giggling. I turned back to Fred and I tried waking him up. Fred? Fred! A short feeling of panic built up until Fred's eyes opened and he sat himself up straight as well. Confused and tired looking, he turned to us. Norman? He said silently. Norman gave him a big smile in response, but Fred's eyes expressed the opposite of happiness. Instead, they widened and he screamed at him. "You little shit! Where the hell were you?" Norman's expression quickly changed from a happy to a scared one. With difficulty to speak, he tried to answer.
I just wanted to scare Amy and Billy a bit for pushing me in the lake. So I hid in the forest behind a tree and then fallen asleep. I wake up and found you on the way.
You were... Do you realize what you caused, Norman?
Fred screamed again. Norman bawled his eyes out while Fred was still screaming in anger. It was too much, so I tugged Fred's sleeve, getting his attention. "Fred, let him be. He's just a kid. How could he have known?" Fred opened his mouth to give a response, but at the sight of Norman crying, he let it be. Instead, he crawled over to Norman to give him a big hug, causing Norman to stop crying and hugging him back. It was a nice brotherly moment to witness. Looking at them both, I felt back at the times I had a fight with Amy, but then hugging it out in the end. Both of us trying to be there for each other, eating ice cream right after a fight to cool us down, giving advice on boys breaking our hearts. And that's what we did, as sisters. People always found it weird how well we went along together, but we never cared. I loved her, and I will never be able to hug her in difficult times ever again. I crawled towards them and joining the hugging, making it a group hug. We just stayed there, not worrying about what came next. Until my eyes wandered around and my heart skipped a beat. I distanced myself from the group, and as if Fred had just seen the same thing at the same time, he did as well. "Norman? What is that?" I asked with a shaky voice. Norman followed where my eyes were glued at and noticed it.
Ow!
He got up and grabbed it with no problem. He turned back to us.
I found it at the bottom of the lake when Amy pushed me. I don't want to keep it, but it looked like a horn of a unicorn, so I wanted to give you that when you found me.
Fred and I stared at the unicorn-like shaped stick, our eyes solely fixed at the crimson-red sharp top. I felt Fred's hand grabbing mine. Norman looked down at the stick and then back at us.
What?